The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and education. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they'd been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is David Jones, who's the CEO of the Community Service Society. Welcome to African American Legends, David.
Thank you very much, Roscoe.
Now, I understand the Community Service Society was founded 165 years ago.
Yeah, the joke around my office, I was there at the beginning.
Yeah, tell us about how it got started and what its focus is now.
Really, the Community Service Society was actually the result of a merger of two charity organizations, the Association for the Improvement of the Condition of the Poor and the Charity Organization Society. These were really built mainly on British models, actually, and they were built by the elites of New York, the Astors, the Vanderbilts, and the rest. And many of the reasons that were built were not particularly nice. They were concerned about the waves of European immigration and the dangers to the fabric of New York. So they were particularly worried about infectious disease. They were worried about the fact that Tammany Hall was buying votes by providing assistance to the poor. And that was leading to a lot of the powerful elements in New York not being in control of the vote. There was a basic concern for, the human condition, but it was tempered by their own self-interest. Once having said that, they did some unique things. Actually, one of the founders was a woman named Josephine Shaw Lowell, who was actually, if those of your viewers saw Glory, her brother actually led black troops in the attack on Fort Pillow. Where he died. All her male members of the family died in the Civil War, and she came down and really became the sort of dean, or whatever, of charity work in New York. And she has a fountain named at Bryant Park. I think she's the only woman with a so honored. But her work was based on something called the notion of friendly visitors. She'd send women, primarily of good breeding, to visit the various poor neighborhoods in the city of New York, to visit the tenements, and interview people in poverty to see if they were deserving poor, and research their condition, and then and only then would they provide support. It actually, since we were the founder of the Columbia School of Social Work, became the beginning of social work in America. We're one of the instrumental parts of that.
Well, things have come a long way since then. First of all, social work and improving people in the community has become part of our culture, right. Particularly after the New Deal with Franklin Roosevelt. Right. And we have many nonprofit organizations that sprung up during the war on poverty in the Johnson administration. And now here we are in 2011 dealing with some of the same issues they were dealing with 165 years ago. How do you make opportunities available for poor people, people who don't have contacts, don't have resources? What is the CSS doing to address some of those issues right now?
Well, we do it in two ways. We're really best known, both nationally and locally, for our research work. One of the reports actually we just issued is being used by the State Assembly to protect rent control. Rent control is open for reauthorization. We did the major report that the State Assembly Democrats are using to convince both the governor and the state Senate that we have to reauthorize rent control and close some of the loopholes that entered into the rent control law. More than 1.6 million, I think, people are in rent-controlled apartments. If that gets lost, or if we're in real trouble, if you're moderate income or poor.
Who's against rent control?
Well, many of the real estate interests that have been supporting elected officials and others feel that rent control puts a burden on them in terms of their ability to charge the highest rate they can. They want to essentially mark apartments to market. The difficulty is that the wage gap in the city of New York has not diminished. It's gotten worse over time. Nearly a third of New Yorkers now live at or near poverty. That's about 3 million people.
That was one of your studies as well.
And it's shocking when you start to interview people, what's going on. Now, the poverty rate for a family of 3 is $18,000, and you double that to come to 200% of poverty. I think anyone on the back of an envelope can figure out how difficult that becomes for living in the city of New York, if not impossible in some cases. And you see one of the signs of that in the dramatic increase in homelessness in New York. It has nothing to do with people not trying to struggle mightily. Many of the homeless actually are working. They're not lazing around. But because the cost, there's so few apartments that would be reasonable, $500 a month is still going to be tough for someone making $18,000 to $32,000, that it's becoming very difficult to survive in the city of New York on a low-wage salary.
But when some people advocate a living wage
Yes.
As a requirement, they say it drives business out. Do they really believe a living wage would drive business out in a place like New York City?
Is something really more, well, I shouldn't be moral about this, but I'm stunned. We had a fight earlier on paid sick leave, which we had done a major report on that ultimately failed in the city council. There's another drive for a living wage. It's not a living wage for everybody. We're talking about a living wage for employers and others who get city revenues. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of a direct, this is not saying every employer. If I'm, a fast food joint, I'm not going to be covered by this. But if I'm actually providing city services, I can't be paying wages that basically force people to turn to government support, to be homeless, and cost our taxpayers even more. So, and it's not much of a wage, I assure you, this is not a great wage. So there's no sign from other cities and localities that had paid sick leave or living wage that it did anything to hamper the private economy. There's no evidence whatsoever that it does.
Well, clearly that's the case, because after the recent financial debacle, all the corporations that got public assistance have made billions of dollars in profit, yet they have not started to rehire. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think they're, obviously they're banking a lot of it. A lot of it goes overseas to other investments. Mm-hmm. They're also coming up with new mechanization efforts. I mean, anyone who's walked into a newly built drugstore sees that now one clerk handles as many as 6 automated registers. Home Depots, all of them are starting to move away from providing people adequate wage, and they're reducing the number of employees they have. And it's a real danger.
It is a danger, but allegedly, when you reduce your workforce, you increase your profit, and you make technology work. Right. So the question is, in this global economy, how do we bring these two things together?
Well, one of the ways we recognize, and it's something that you know better than I do, we clearly are going to have to refocus on how we're training the next generation of young people. Young people, both those who are in high school and those who go on to college. All those machines, automated machines I talked about, need highly skilled professionals to service them. When they break, I can't be someone reading at a 4th grade level who can hope to fix them. Many of your viewers may have seen FiOS technicians who deal with this very sophisticated system Verizon puts out into television. It's all computerized. The technician has to spend most of their time.
But do you need enough people in those fields to meet the needs of our burgeoning population? We are 318 million people now.
Apparently they will. Essentially, in the technology sector, you can't export jobs that deal with the actual servicing of a very complex machinery and infrastructure, whether it's computer-based or cars now that require enormous computer skills. It's no longer somebody with a wrench who can fix one of the new cars. Try to fix a Prius or one of these fancy hybrids with just a wrench. It can't be done. You have to have an understanding of computers and computer chips. So the level of skills is going up, and I don't think we're adequately preparing young people for it. I mean, I've sort of been arguing with the city administration. The city has one of the least well-organized career and technical education systems in the country.
That's an interesting point. Going back a few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 decades, you had the academic track, the commercial track, and the vocational track, and many minorities were guided into those tracks.
Absolutely.
Now, the fact is they did get jobs, but then we became concerned about their getting college degrees so they become lawyers and doctors and engineers. And we've done something in that, but still with a dropout rate of something like 50 or 60%.
And for men.
What do we do for those people who don't have those kind of education, because the jobs as laborers and service people without skills are just disappearing?
Yeah, there are two things we've been working on in regard to this. We came out with a major report that got a lot of attention, talking about something called the GED. The GED is the...
What is the GED?
The GED is the alternative, actually created just after World War II.
The General Equivalency Diploma.
Which allows you to take an exam, a very difficult exam, and get a high school equivalency, and allows you then to go on to community college or college. It's accepted. The difficulty is, what our report uncovered, that New York State is dead last, below Mississippi, Alabama, any place, in terms of its GED program, in terms of both the numbers who pass and the numbers who take it. And it's been an afterthought. The difficulty is you have millions of people who are of working age in the city of New York who don't have a high school diploma, don't have that minimum credential. And I think people say, well, that doesn't matter. It didn't matter in the 1950s not to have a high school diploma. What you don't realize is that to now get into a pre-apprenticeship program, to be a carpenter or a plumber, you have to have a high school equivalency or you're not accepted. Almost everything now requires that basic certificate in order to do anything other than the most menial kinds of work. As I joke, it's anecdotal, but now Starbucks looks for a couple of years of college for their barista. What hope for a young person who doesn't even have a high school diploma?
Well, many of the programs, commercial programs to train nurses, aides, and so on, provide what they call basic skills. I don't know whether that's GED or not. How do we get people to be motivated to do those kind of things?
Actually, I think, you sort of, I try to step back and stop criticizing young people because I sort of vaguely remember how ridiculous you are when you're 16 or 17, maybe just in my neighborhood, but I get very irritated with people who condemn, they like music or this and that. 16 and 17-year-olds are not the most rational or directed people. They have to be sat upon, basically, sometime, just to keep them through the period. I think most cultures recognize that. I think we have to have multiple pathways, actually. It's called that way. I think we have to have, for many young people, they have to see a direct linkage. How is this going to help me earn a wage as soon as I get out?
But the question is, should we track them? See, one of the issues the NAACP is concerned, you put the minority kids into the career track and the middle-class kids into the professional track. How do we deal with that?
It's going different ways. And I'll tell you one of the things, this was a shock to me. We do a poll every year called the Unheard Third. It uses Lake Associates, the major national pollster, and it asks 28 minutes of questions. Aimed at people at or near poverty. And one of the questions I asked some years ago is, what would they see as a major help to education? And it came out, interestingly, the first two answers were straight on. Smaller class size and better instruction, better teachers. But the third item was a focus on career and technical education. And what's happened at the base are two things. First of all, career and technical education no longer means what it used to, shop, for my generation, and certainly it actually means skills that allow people to get an income almost immediately. And at least one program in Newark actually shows that young people in career and technical education go on to college almost at twice the rate as general education. I think the other thing that came out of the polling was how limited the dollars are in poor families. I think the number was 60 to 75% when they asked how much money they have in total reserves, said they had $500 or less, with a substantial number saying zero. So when I hit 16, I'm in a household where there's no money. I'm told that I should go on to college or community college, which is no longer free now since our decision to start charging at CUNY and other places. I'm really in a bind. I have to make a wage. I have to be working full time with no skills and trying to get through a rigorous academic course. So I think we have to readjust some of the parameters here. Career and technical can mean an aviation program, which actually pays young people who successfully do well in that program more than I pay first-year lawyers that I hire at CSS. I think we have to get over sort of the burden of my generation, same as ours, the old discussion.
Aviation technology is kind of esoteric.
Right.
But many of these programs talk about preparing people to be barbers and to be beauty operators.
Those have not been successful. Some of the real abuses of the New York system are essentially putting people in programs that don't lead to serious wage jobs. But that doesn't mean how it has to be. There are programs that you could focus on for medical technicians that pay a significant wage. I'm not talking about going to the old system of beauty school. I'm talking about, let's have a serious discussion with New York industry and focuses on their weaknesses in terms of their need for entry-level workers, but with entry-level workers with a career path.
Now, the New York State Board of Regents is going to raise the standards for a diploma.
Right, and GED.
Particularly in math and science.
Yep.
And what that's going to do, unless the instruction and the motivation improves, is increase the dropout rate.
Right.
Now, they maintain it's to make us competitive. What can they do in the education world to make it possible for more kids to actually be able to accomplish these higher standards?
Right.
That's the education question.
And I think that there's a question. First of all, I don't want to generalize about my generation of young people coming on. When you go out and sit with them, yes, I do it like I did.
There's a range.
There's a long range. And I want to first say, let's forget the social issue for the moment. Let's just focus on the inputs. I think what they can do, if they can serious, is start really funding adequate after-school programs that focus not on basketball, not on sports, but on serious academics. So young people, wherever their motivation, whether I'm a parent driving them crazy, or I really want to try to make it, I finally understood that I need to get a job and get out of my, on my own, that we at least have the resources in place on after school, Saturday and Sunday, where I can get the kind of supports. I think we also have to be as rigorous.
Well, those kind of programs people call fluff, they call it pork.
Ask any upper middle class parent and watch what they do with their child after school.
Well, they do the same thing.
That's the main focus, to get your youngster able to compete.
Now, we live in a democratic society, and since many people are poor, it seems that there should be more political organization around these issues. I think what happened in Wisconsin with the teachers has mobilized a lot of people's attention, but they're concerned about the old days where in some of these programs favoritism worked.
Absolutely.
But favoritism didn't run the whole program. No. So what can we do politically? I know CSS does these great studies and they present them to the legislature. What can we do political to move us along? For example, if the regents raise education standards, shouldn't we be doing something to improve the quality of the programs in school and after school?
And I think that's going to have to be pressed on the elected officials who are supposedly representing these communities. That has to be the first target of discussion.
Well, what would you say if you wanted to improve it? Would you go class size? Would you go quality of teachers? Would you go preschool?
I always believe all, but preschool, obviously, we know that Head Start works. Mm-hmm. But also
if it doesn't follow up with small class sizes, it doesn't.
I mean, the Community Service Society has launched a program that I've talked to you about. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, it's called Experience Corps. It basically mobilizes seniors from within communities, puts them through intense training on a literacy program, a reading program, and then puts them directly into classrooms helping kids who are falling behind, particularly in those critical years, first and second grade. Mm-hmm. Because if you miss it, I wasn't reading in third grade. My parents, sort of lifted. That was the end of weekends for me for the rest of my life, it seems. But I think we have to have available that transition of a youngster. If they start falling behind early, Actually, our prior chancellor used to say, if you haven't made it by 4th grade, it's a lot of catch-up that has to go on. And I think the internalization of feeling you can't make it in early grades, if you can't read well, I can't understand the instructions for math, I can't under the instructions for geography, all the things that flow from that. But if we can intensely make sure that every child coming out of the elementary grades has really good reading skills and the basic fundamentals of math, at least we have a step up towards the other kinds of efforts we can make. It's just not happening.
But what about role models in the black community? Our role models are rappers and basketball players. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but how do we make learning exciting and interesting to masses of kids who are not going to be rappers or basketball players?
Well, I think it is something we have to turn we have so many celebrities of great fame and wealth now. We have a president of the United States. We have people who have done extraordinary things. But there is this tilt, and it's almost magical thinking. And I sort of, the notion of me as an overweight kid being in pro basketball, though, that's all that they had and when I grew up in Crown Heights, we were told that's what you get. And I think basically the notion of running down the street, and I come in last, did not make the MBA look very likely. An accountancy, maybe, or what I did, maybe. I think a lot of kids are like that particularly at a younger age, if you expose them, they ask just how high. It has to be exposing early. It doesn't mean they're not going to be teased. It doesn't mean everything is going to work out. But I tell you, because we have such an enormous cohort, we're going to change the yield curve incredibly. I'm not going to save every youngster. There's going to be a youngster, perhaps like me, if I didn't have somebody supporting, who just doesn't get it until much later. And that's why I do want a second chance much later, because I think people evolve. But particularly if you grab them early and start focusing on that early and having the kind of after-school programming and Saturday and Sunday programming that is fun, but deals with things that are exciting. They do love video games, and there's an enormous amount of math and computer science in that. There's ways of making this more than just rote that have already been explored, but are just not coming into the communities we know. And then I look at the elite schools that are private schools where everything is geared towards that. They're fun courses on Saturday and Sunday, but they're teaching vital skills for participating in the economy later on.
Well, clearly learning is exciting, and one thing that we can do is the arts and culture. Right. For example, New York City has more museums per square inch than any place in the world.
My favorite topic.
And if we could get people in the community, parents and volunteers, to take kids to the Metropolitan Museum, to take them to the Schomburg, to take them to the Brooklyn Museum, just once in a while.
I agree.
So they get a feeling with that.
But you know, Roscoe, it's been one of my pet peeves. So we have a system of the city of New York for culturals. And as a kid, I used to play hooky at the Museum of Natural History. I always drop off school and go there. The expense of getting into our culturals is so high now that it's only available to the upper middle class. It can cost, to get to the Bronx Zoo now, it can cost as much as $20 a person.
They have one day, which is free, I think.
And Wednesday, great for somebody who's working but the Museum of Natural History. All of these are supported by government tax dollars. These are not freebies. In London and in DC, every cultural is free. Why New York doesn't provide the same kind of allowance for its working people? I'm not talking about giving freebies away. They're paying their taxes. Why they should be essentially priced out of the market? And we've asked this question. A substantial number of low and moderate income people can't consider going to New York's culturals because they become sort of an apartheid elite venue, and it's not fair, particularly with a city that is more than 50% black.
But the cultural institutions say that the state doesn't give them enough money.
Well, they've been giving for years, and if they can't have it both ways. They can't take tax dollars and then become a preserve for only the very rarefied group of New Yorkers. It's not fair, because I think it's exactly right. I want working class, they may get one day a week because they're working 6 days a week, I assure you. One day where they can go and take their child to the Museum of Natural History and look at the elephant and the cave bear and the dinosaur. That's what really solidifies, if they really are insisting that we have family values, I want the opportunities. Even, that's what LaGuardia was talking about at the height of the Great Depression. And we're not seeing that kind of vision here.
Your passion is so evident.
Yeah,
and the fact is that there are many people who feel like you. What can we do to get more people to be interested in these issues and bring them up with our elected and other officials?
Well, I think one of the things I've been trying, though without success, is I think we should have a review every time the city and the city council authorizes cultural expenditures. What in the world are you doing for allowing normal, ordinary people, someone working really hard as a security guard, making $10 an hour, to take their child to the Bronx Zoo or the Museum of Natural History or Museum of Modern Art? You want a cultured group? At least allow people who can't afford the $12 it costs to go to a movie to do something productive with their kids. And it drives me crazy that other great cities in the world see this and we don't.
Well, of course, in the Cairo, the Egyptian Revolution, one of the things they wanted to protect was the museum there, right in Cairo, which is a great museum that people can just go to.
Right.
So today we've been talking about CSS 165 years later, and the problems have changed in scope, but they still remain with dealing with helping to improve the quality of everybody in our society. Today on African American Legends, we've been talking with David Jones, the CEO of the Community Service Society. Thanks for being with us today, David.
Pleasure.